First, though, let's talk to Cormac Smith, former strategic communications advisor to the then Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister Pavlo Klimkin. Cormac Smith, thanks so much for coming on the show this evening. What's your assessment of where the war is at?
Lewis, thank you very much for having me on. Look, my assessment at the moment is, regardless of the huge sums of aid which you outlined before, we are letting Ukraine down at the moment. 100%. The suffering of the Ukrainian people under, what is a genocidal Russian attack over the last 2 years has not seen the equal since the Second World War across Europe. Now the shenanigans going on in Washington, D.C., held up in particular by the Speaker, Michael Johnson, who I will say is a puppet of Donald Trump, who I will further say is a puppet of Vladimir Putin, is catastrophic. But actually, you said something in your preamble before me. You said that maybe Europe should have begun to rearm. Europe should have put its industries on a war footing 2 years ago.
Yeah.
There are certainly signs. I was talking to a friend of mine, a former senior military guy, only yesterday. There are signs that our industries in the UK and in other parts of Europe are starting to rearm. But look, if Donald Trump gets back in, let's be very, very clear. One, he will pull the rug out from underneath Ukraine. And also, it is very likely he will pull the rug out from underneath Europe. Now, can Europe stand on its own 2 feet against Russia? We most certainly should be able to. We have a combined economic might that is between 12 and 15 times the size of the Russian economy. The difference is, on average, we spend less than 2% of our GDP at the moment on defence, where Russia is, by various estimates, spending between 30 and 40% of its GDP, completely focused towards the war. So I think, this war is now, not going to be won this year. The Ukrainians are having a really difficult time. They have recently lost the strategically significant town or city of Avdiivka. That city itself has been effectively wiped off the face of the map, as have many other cities. What we have seen, because of the severe shortage of ammunition, is that the Ukrainians have had to switch from attack to defence and to just hold on. But they are in desperate straits at the moment. They are running drastically short of ammunition. So, this war can be won. And actually, there's much more at stake in Ukraine than just Ukraine. This is a wolf that will come to our door. So this war is not going to be won this year. But how the outcome of this war, I think, will be determined by what we in the West do this year. And I think the most important message that I would get across tonight is we simply cannot rely on America as a reliable partner at the moment. Europe, which is the EU and Britain and any other European country, look at Denmark, who last week, little Denmark, but they decided to donate every single piece of artillery and every single artillery shell they had to Ukraine immediately, because they see Ukraine's need is greater than yet theirs. And if I can say one more thing, and this is what I get from my Ukrainian friends in government and in the Ukrainian armed forces, if every country had showed the commitment to Ukraine as Britain has from the very start, I think this war might well be over now and be over in Ukraine's favour.
Yeah. But Cormac, what do we do if the worst happens, and worse for Ukraine, and Donald Trump is elected? Because, as you say, that probably means that there is absolutely no possibility of more serious military aid coming to Ukraine's way. Is it possible, if in that circumstance, which is at the very least a substantial, is at the very least at least a credible prospect, that the war can possibly be won in those circumstances?
Well, as I said, in Europe, both the EU and Britain and one or two other non-EU countries, we have a financial might, and this is my back of a fag pack calculation, that is between 12 and 15 times the size of the Russian economy. And I was speaking to a former army colonel last night, who's a mate of mine, and talked about a number of industries who are already starting to ramp up. This takes time. So, we need to see Europe recognize the fact that we can no longer rely on the US as a reliable partner. If Putin were to be successful in Ukraine, we absolutely know that Moldova and the Baltics will be next. And that is not me saying that. That's me saying that, having been spoken to people in both politics and the military in these countries, not in Moldova, but certainly in the Baltics, since about 2015 when I started working in that area. We need to give a little bit more respect, and we need to pay a little bit more attention to what people like the Ukrainians and the Baltics and the Poles are telling us now, and have actually been telling us for many, many years. And, in the time I was out there as a diplomat, I saw this, I would call, lack of respect. We need to see the world more through Ukrainian eyes.
But the problem is, Cormac, isn't it, is that you're absolutely right to say, relative economic strength is, on paper, clearly on our side. But the problem is that Russia, despite the fact it has a much smaller economy, it is devoting a considerable proportion of that economy, a greater proportion of that economy than we are, to the war effort. And politicians politicians in Europe have not been willing to have that conversation about rearmament with voters and what that might mean and what it might mean to redivert industrial production. Let's think about our own military spending. We can see from stories in the last few weeks, our own military is struggling. The aircraft carrier nuclear missiles seemingly don't work. We're not actually in a great position militarily ourselves, are we?
I had this exact conversation yesterday with a friend of mine. Look, to back up what you said, if I haven't said it already, estimates are that Russia is spending between 30 and 40% of their gross domestic product on the war effort. In Europe, on average, we're spending less than 2%. Certainly, I am hearing more and more stories and signs that major arms industries are starting to ramp up production. I have got to believe that if the will, in fact, I have no doubt, if the collective will is there with the major economies in Europe, that we can meet this challenge. And as I say, we may need to meet it because it may simply be the fact that we cannot rely on America as a reliable partner anymore. But I always quote Alexei Reznikov, who was the last Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and that position changed last year. And before the war, in December of 21, Reznikov said in a CNN interview, he said, look, we don't want or expect your boots on the ground. Just give us the weapons we need and we will do our own fighting. And those three weapon systems, while nobody has done more with the Brits from the early days with the anti-tank stuff to there, giving them the Challengers and Storm Shadow for the long-range artillery. But we're still not giving them sufficient. They probably need between 300 and 500 modern battle tanks. We've probably given them less than 100. We are not giving them sufficient long-range artillery to really strike elements of the Russian logistics chain far behind the front line. And I heard only this evening that the first F-16s may finally be on the way. But, at the moment, there's this dire situation where... Yes. No,
I was just going to say, finally, because it's running out of time. What would you just say? What would your message be to those who might say, who have lost faith that Ukraine can actually win this war, or at least win it on anything like the terms that they wish to win it on?
Well, I'd say two things. I'd say go and live among the Ukrainians and understand what they are as a people, as I have done for 2 years, and I have nurtured those friendships since I came back from Ukraine, one. But I would say, secondly, don't delude yourself that this is about Ukraine alone. There is far more at stake in Ukraine than Ukraine. Effectively, Russia is at war with the West and NATO, and that is how it is seen around the world. And, effectively... Russia has been waging a hybrid war on the West, certainly since 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, but actually probably before that, if we start looking at a lot of different things they have done. So my main message is this wolf will come to our door. Have no doubt about it. If we were to allow Putin to be successful in Ukraine, he will not stop there. He will go on to the next, especially if we found ourselves in a position with a second Trump presidency and the US pulling the rug from under both Ukraine and Europe. Time is running out. We need to stand on our own 2 feet, and that means, which you've already said, putting our armaments industry on a war footing. I'll get called a warmonger for this. I'm not. There's no war in history has hurt me more than this one, because I have many dear friends been affected every day. But freedom is not free.
Cormac Smith there, putting it extremely well and very, very crisply indeed about why this war is a war that no Ukrainian had wanted to fight or prosecute, but one that was put upon them. And I completely agree with him when he says that, frankly, we've been relying on the Ukrainians to do our fighting for us, and we're not even willing as the West to actually give them the tools they need to prosecute it. Cormac Smith there. I want to talk to you about